So it is my honor to introduce our thought leader for today, Jeannine Rivet. As Executive Vice President of UnitedHealth Group, Jeannine Rivet works with and on behalf of all business segments in areas focused on strategic business relationships, customer relations, social responsibility, and nursing advancement. She is on numerous industry leadership boards and councils, as well as a mentor to women in business. She has been recognized by AAHP, Boston University School of Public Health, Fortune Magazine, Girl Scouts of Minnesota, and Wisconsin River Valleys, Minneapolis St. Paul Business Journal, Minnesota City Business, and the American Association of Colleges of Nursing, and is a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing. Jeannine Rivet received a master's in public health from Boston University. She also holds a BS in nursing from Boston College and was a registered nurse for several years prior to entering the managed care industry. Please welcome Jeannine Rivet.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
And of course, you'll be hearing a lot more detail about that nice little intro as we go through the presentation this morning. And it's a small, intimate group, but because we're being videotaped, I have a little circle I can stay in. Otherwise, I'd actually get closer to you, just so you're aware. Let me start with the basics. When I first put this together, it was about 7 years ago. I had a customer that I was working with very closely who wanted to bring in a speaker to meet with their up-and-coming women in their organization. It was a pharmaceutical company. And said, can you come and speak with them, about 100 of them, they were from all over the country, for about an hour and just talk about your career. Now think about that, if you had that request. Thinking you stand up in front of people and talk about yourself for an hour. That's not very productive. What are you trying to accomplish? Tell me your goals, tell me your objectives, and let's see if we can work this out. And they kept saying, well, we just want to get them inspired. And, you know, they just didn't know where they were going. So I said, first of all, you don't have a career without having a life. I mean, those are blended, whether you don't walk into work and all of a sudden home is gone, or you won't walk in the door or the garage at home and work is gone. That's blended. So I decided to make it a little more interesting. I had to think about a way to tell my story. And it was fascinating. I highly recommend you do this for yourself. So I started thinking about my decades. And once I did that, I realized, okay, what did I do in those decades? And then what did I learn in those decades? Well, I didn't even know what the decades were, because we think about the year we graduated, the year we got married, the year we moved, the year we had babies, the year we did this. We even know when we got our pets. But I had to really go back and say, what were the years in my decades? So I started with the 20s, the 30s, and we're going to go through each one of them, and I will give you some examples in each of them. And then what was the foundation that got me even into my 20s? The foundation was my family, of course, first, my faith, which is from my family, and my friends, which have changed over time, and I'll give you examples of that as we go through the rungs of the ladder. Then as I progress, and values, which come from family, faith, and friends. My values were developed as I went into my 20s. And then education became a foundation, and I would honestly say my nursing education became a foundation for the rest of my life, which obviously impacted my career, and as I progressed up the rungs of the ladder, have gotten very involved in community as well. So you'll see that as we go forward. So that's kind of the baseline. And I'll just give you a clue. When I'm holding on to the past, I don't have my hands free to reach for the future. So the theme of the rungs of the ladder, okay? So we're going to go into my 20s now, and you'll figure it out pretty quick that I'm 65. So I'll just tell you right now, because by the time I give you the years of my rungs, all you have to do is sit down and add them up very nicely. So I turned 65 in June. And so the years of my 20s were 68 to 77. So what was happening in the world, so to speak, in that decade? Motorola invented the cell phone. That's a long time ago. We just think about them as always being here and having them in our hand. Well, of course, it was about 5 pounds, but nonetheless, it was a cell phone. FedEx held its first overnight continuous operations, which became overnight delivery. Toyota became known for lean manufacturing. Ethernet networking was invented, but it took another 30 years for broadband to be widespread, even though we started in the 76. The hippies, Vietnam, the Beatles, gas lines and rationing. I remember that, actually. And the movie of the decade was The Godfather. Okay? Does that sound familiar to some of us in the room? So what did I do in my 20s? This is the do part. So that is me, both pictures. That's my baby picture and my nursing school graduation picture. And I just attended this past weekend my 45th reunion from a 3-year hospital diploma program in Rhode Island. And I did wear that cap for many years before they said we didn't have to wear them. So got my RN diploma in Rhode Island. Of course, the hospital doesn't have a school of nursing any longer. Got my baccalaureate, as Dan mentioned, several years later at Boston College. Worked for 3 companies, 4 different roles. Was married and was divorced, no children. Okay. So I went to a 3-year hospital program, which for me was truly a foundation, both for my nursing career as well as my ongoing career and interest in education. And it was hard. We would labor in those days, as well as taking classes to get our diplomas. But it was the best learning that I ever had. And it truly was foundational, because what we learn as nurses and we apply in a clinical environment is extremely transferable, if we think about it, to our lives as well as to business. And once we think about that in a broader sense, we can use all the skills, the problem-solving skills, the communication skills, the relationship-building skills, the compassion skills, which is and I would tell you, it's what has evolved my leadership skills. So very important to me. So I worked in Rhode Island Hospital in pediatrics for 4 years, and I was really glad when they said we didn't have to wear those caps. Those are nylon, not washable, and kids would scrunch them, pee on them, vomit on them, spit medicine on them. It was really not pretty, and I was ordering caps all the time. And when the first day that they said we didn't have to wear them, I have no idea where they went, but that was it. I was done. And one of my nursing classmates, 45 years later, still has caps. And I thought, really? But she does. It was very interesting. My second role was to work with handicapped children in a public health environment, running a clinic as well as doing home visits and therapies with them, as well as counseling with the parents. And then I moved into working in a clinic in what we called in those days a health maintenance organization. It was bricks and mortar where they owned ambulatory centers and clinics, not hospitals, and went into the pediatric department, first as a nurse and then as a supervisor in the pediatric department. So that was my 20s. So that's what I did. What did I learn in my 20s? Well, I graduated. That was terrific. I'm in the hospital unit. I'm doing what I think I'm supposed to do, but I'm realizing they don't teach you everything. You've got to be observant. You've got to build on what you know. You've got to ask questions, because you just don't get trained on every single piece. So you had to be open for being vulnerable and going to check on things. So it really was helpful for me. And then taking that baseline education and starting to apply it, after I went back up my baccalaureate, what I realized was I knew more than I thought I knew. And so start to trust your instincts. And I'll give you some examples of that. Take some risks. I got married and divorced. I started to differentiate what's the difference between being alone, which I could choose to be, or being lonely, and how did I handle those, and how did I understand those emotions? Very important for my development in that decade. Treat people as you want to be treated. It became obvious to me that there were some people not necessarily being very nice or pleasant to each other, particularly as a female and frequently in an all-male environment. And then be brave, which goes with take risks. So a couple of examples. Supervisor. I'm in this new role, supervisor. I've never supervised before. All of a sudden, I'm hiring people because we have gaps, people are stressed, we have holes to fill, and I'm getting pressure to hire an aide, and I hired the person that everybody said would be terrific. My instinct said, she's not the right person for the job. She's just not the right fit, either culturally for us or enough experience for the speed in which we're working. Just not the right fit. But the pressure was on. My very first hire her, she was not the right fit. My instincts were there, and I didn't follow them. And so what happens? I had to do the rework. I had to figure out how to help her find another job which I did, luckily. She was more suited to another department than pediatrics. And then I had to still go back out and hire, do the recruiting and the hiring, and we still had a gap for a longer period of time. So that was one of my first following my instincts. Another one, I mentioned being married and divorced. So my father, I saved him from this, but I put my arm in his arm as I'm getting ready to walk down the aisle, and I'm thinking I should not be doing this. I should not be marrying this person. Okay, and I knew that. But again, all my friends were married, and my parents were excited, and off I go down the aisle. And I made the decision 3.5, 4 years later, this wasn't working for us. And so I'm the first person in my family, good Catholic family, to get a divorce. And I remember the weekend that I had already started the process that I was going to tell my parents. That was the be brave part, because I had to now sit down in front of them and tell them that this wasn't working. And it was Labor Day weekend. They had been gone for the weekend and came back. I go to their house, and I'm doing laundry while I'm there, so I'm taking advantage of the house as I was moving into an apartment. And I had to get them together. They were unpacking a bag and doing this and that. I finally said, okay, I need both of you here sitting in the dining room. Okay, so they came and sat down, and I very calmly said, I've left Jack. And my father very calmly said, where did you leave him? Seriously, you cannot make this up. Where did you leave him? And I did not know whether to laugh or cry. So I did a little bit of both. And I said, no, you don't understand. I am leaving him. I am getting a divorce. And my father immediately said, oh, great, you can move in with us, you can stay here as long as you want, and on and on. And my instinct right then was to withdraw and say, I can't do that. And my mother, God bless her, said, well, now let's look at the balance here. You can move in while you're in transition, but you can't move back here. You need your life. You need to find out how to actually live your own life, and you need to deal with this issue. This is yours. We are here to support you. And my mother's the quiet one of the two, and I said, I'm going on Mom's side. This is exactly what I need to do. And of course, that's when I started understanding the difference between lonely and being alone. It was a big transition for me. I'd always been either at home in nursing school with a roommate after that, and then I got married. So this was going to be my first time actually taking full responsibility for everything I did and where I lived, et cetera. And it was, again, a very important experience. The other risk was, and some of you can relate to this, being the only woman in a physician environment, early days, I was asked by one of our pediatricians to move to join the quality committee. It was relatively new, about a year old. And we were looking to become, as a health plan, federally qualified. And so the quality committee had a big impact on whether we could actually fill out the application and get recognition. And so I went to the committee meeting, and he was always coming back and giving me the assignments anyway, so it seemed kind of logical for me to go with him. So, of course, I'm the only female and the only nurse in the room. It's all male physicians. And the leader of the quality committee was a 73-year-old, at that time, give or take, surgeon. And walk in, sit down, and without looking at me or acknowledging me, he looks at his papers and said, we seem to have an intruder in this committee meeting. I mean, that's a good way to start, right? An intruder. And God bless the pediatrician. Oh, no. He said, Dr. Perry, I'm the one who invited Jeannine. She's doing all the quality work. I think she can really help us. And it'll just save some time, and we'll be more efficient. Totally ignores that conversation. And it's clear, you can hear a pin drop in the room because nobody knows what to say. And they're expecting me to get up and walk out. That's truly what they were expecting by body language. And I said, Dr. Perry, here's a suggestion. How about if I take notes for this meeting, and we can decide what we can do later? He doesn't say anything, and then he starts the meeting, still doesn't acknowledge me. I dutifully take notes, and of course in those days you're writing them. And I then not only summarized the notes, I gave assignments based on what I heard, 2 people, put timelines, sent them out. By the next meeting, we had accomplished more in a month than they had had in a year. And so I describe it as taking a risk, being a little brave. What were they going to do, kick me out of the committee? That would be fine with me, but that wasn't going to be useful for them. And I had an opportunity. So I call it she or he. In this case, it was she who holds the pen rules. And it worked. They indirectly, all the physicians invited me, he never did, all the physicians invited me back. Could I continue? And by the third meeting, they were asking me questions, they were engaging with me. He never once spoke with me, in or out of that committee. He retired 2 years later, and he walked by me in the hallway. And I said, Dr. Perry, good luck on your retirement. Rivet, you did a good job on that committee. That was it. So you never know who sees you, how they see you, what the behavior is. But if you follow your instincts and be creative, be a little brave, I'm learning that this is okay. You know, I'm not going to die. Nothing's going to happen that's bad. So let me try it. And you'll hear that build as I go through the rest of my story. Excuse me, because I'm going to lose my voice. So now we're going to move into my 30s. So you can be guessing now, because I'm going to tell you what's going on in the world. The U.S. airlines industry deregulated in that decade. First commercial email. So we had a cell phone in the first decade. Now we have email by CompuServe. Walmart got access to Procter & Gamble's inventory, and that became the first coupling of supply chains. We think naturally that they've always been there, but they weren't. Walmart initiated that. IBM put out the first personal computer. Star Wars was the movie of the decade. It's still around, interesting. AIDS was the clinical issue of the decade. 3 people were shot, John Lennon, President Reagan, and the Pope. And Charles and Diana got married. Okay? So that's kind of the outside view. Oh, I should say, I also learned as I'm going into my 30s, to take a quote from Mike Ditka, success isn't permanent because you're going to make mistakes, and that's the part of learning, as long as you learn from the mistakes. But failure isn't fatal either. When you do make a mistake, usually you're your own worst enemy on how hard that mistake was, and it's recoverable, unless you're in a clinical environment, obviously. So my 30s, as Dan mentioned, I was at a point in my career where I had to think about what I was going to do. I really liked the clinical work, even as I evolved in that health center to taking on more management responsibilities. I never quite took my foot out of nursing. I was still doing triage, I was doing counseling classes, I was creating newborn classes for parents, and still doing things, which I really enjoyed. But as a very wonderful manager of mine said, you're at a fork in the road. You're either going to take on more management responsibilities and stop clinical, or go into clinical, because you're at a point where you're trying to do both 100% and you can't. And that was probably the first good advice I got, was to step back and do some soul searching. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I want to be a nurse practitioner. Lots of programs. I was living in Rhode Island then. Lots of programs in Rhode Island, Boston, Connecticut, so close by. Maybe I'll become a pediatric nurse practitioner, which in the back of my mind I've been thinking about for a while. And I looked into the programs, but I thought, if I'm going to do that, well, maybe I should become a physician. If I'm going to spend the time to go back and be a nurse practitioner, maybe I can just be a pediatrician. Not just, maybe I can be a pediatrician. And so I looked into those programs, and Brown University was literally up the street from where I was working, and they were looking for nurses and women in the program at that time. So I kind of met the qualifications. I got the application, I looked at it, spent some time starting to fill it out, and I thought, really? This is going to take pre-med classes, medical school, internship, fellow, and then what am I going to do? I'm going to have my practice, and I'm going to have a really nice practice, but am I going to influence policy, change the health system? Which committees will I have to get on, et cetera, et cetera? And so then my third route was MBA. So needless to say, I didn't take any of those, as you can see. MBA, because I thought, well, then I want management. I really want to get into this management mode to learn more, because I've got good clinical background and hands-on, because I'm learning a lot on the job, but I need to supplement it. And I looked at the MBA programs, and I have to tell you, this is in the 70s, the late 70s, that most of the MBA programs were focused on, I call it accounting and economics. Not necessarily, they supplemented with a few marketing classes, but it wasn't really focused on broad business. So I was really in a dilemma, because none of them seemed to fit the profile of what I was wanting to do by now. And Boston University opened up a school of public health, master's degree. You had to have 6 years of clinical experience in any field, but it had to be clinical experience. And it was part-time only, because they wanted people who were working full or part-time. And they had a concentration that they had just started on health administration. And you could take not only classes in the School of Public Health, you could take it in the business school and in the law school to supplement what you wanted. It was like a dream come true. There was my opportunity to do that. I continued to work full-time, got my MPH. As soon as I finished my MPH, within 6 to 8 months, I was recruited. I moved to DC, and in that decade, I've had 4 different roles. I moved later in that decade from DC to Colorado. I'll give you a little history on those. And I'm making all these moves, so I decided, and I was not very good at plants. I was actually killing every plant that I had in the house. So I decided my green thumb was not mine, and I didn't think I could kill a cat. So I figured by the time I moved to Colorado, cats were good. They could find out where the food was and where the litter box was, and that would be safe. And I've had cats ever since, actually. So from Rhode Island, where by the time I left, I was actually running some of the health centers themselves from a clinical and administration approach. And then I moved to D.C. to run bigger clinics in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia for what was then Group Health Association, which was a very large health plan that we would call it today. And then at the end of that decade, I was being recruited to go to Colorado to run a health plan, not clinic. Where this particular company contracted for all the work with clinics and with hospitals and with everything in the community. What you'd manage were all the sales, billing, enrollment, claim systems, data analytics, actuarial services, marketing, those types of services to actually support some clinical care coordination services, discharge planning, things like that. And I remember talking to the CEO who was recruiting me, who I had worked with previously. And he wasn't really interviewing me. He was trying to just give me the job. And now I have to move from D.C. to Colorado. I need to understand why he wants me to do this, because this is owning all of the dollars and cents and bottom line and everything. And so I went, and after a long day of interviews with everybody else, I said to him, okay, aren't you going to ask me any questions? I mean, I need to know where you're coming from and why you're talking with me. And he said, okay, have you ever done a budget? Of course, he knew I had. Have you ever worked with physicians? Yes. I mean, he gave me about 4 or 5 softball questions like that. And he said, why? I can answer that. He said, what I need, I've got a lot of talented people in this organization. What I need is somebody who knows how to work with clinicians, how to feel what they go through, understand it, so when you're negotiating with them, you know what they're saying. You know what the backdrop is behind their needs and reasons for bringing issues up. That has taught you to work with people on all levels, so customers are fine, and I can supplement any skill you don't have. You're not going to do the finance part. You're not going to have to do the sales. We can hire all those skills. What I can't do is take a salesperson, a finance person, and drop them in this position. They won't understand the dynamics of the environment we're in and how to create those relationships. And I thought, wow, he's pretty smart. That makes a lot of sense. And then he put me on first class. I'd never been in first class, and flew me home. I thought, well, okay, this is really cool. And I got back, and it was actually a very hard decision to move to Colorado, because the only person I knew was him. And here I go, starting again. And that's when I got the cats. Actually, I'd been there about 3 months, and somebody had a kitten that was left of the litter, and they didn't know what to do with it. And I said, okay, I'll take it. And that's how I started with cats. So that's my kind of direction in that decade. Now, what did I learn? I learned that you create your own presence, and I'll give you a couple of examples, and that you can modify your environment, but you do that based on your own behavior. I learned to stand up for beliefs, what was important to me. I'm learning to keep friends and make new ones, because I'm moving, so I don't want to lose my dear friends who are in other states, but I also need to make new ones so I can create my new environment. And I'm realizing I've got a different role now, so I need some mentors. So who do I identify both formally that I wanted to relate to on a more continuous basis, and informally for skill sets? I call it skill development. So I'm now doing a lot of speaking, public speaking in that decade, and I'm realizing, I mean, I know to talk about clinical things, but now I'm talking about broader, different audiences and broader topics. Who do I see that's an excellent speaker in the either in our company or in the community? And I go buy them a cup of coffee and sit down with them and say, does this come just naturally to you, or do you have a sequence? How do you do it? And I learned more from interviewing about 5 people over coffee at different times that helped me significantly in how to think about creating presentations for that environment, as well as doing the presentations. So that was a way of looking for informal mentors. And people love to talk about what they do. They'll take time out. You just have to get it scheduled. That's the biggest challenge, is getting on the calendars. But I found that people really loved sharing their experiences. So I learned a lot about integrity and standing up for your beliefs in this decade. So the job in DC that I went to was union. And I had not worked with a union environment. We had 4 labor unions. One of them was nurses and physical therapists, another was the physicians, the third was dentists, and the fourth was every other position except for management. So we were a very small minority management. And I did some arbitrations and did that work, but then it came to the union negotiations. So I'm very logical about, here are the issues, and we've got an outside attorney who's been through all the negotiations with this union in the past. And I developed some nice relationships with them before we went into the negotiations. And we walked into the room for our very first meeting. There were 8 or 9 of them around the table. There were 3 of us, one of my assistants and the lawyer and I. And we're waiting for the lawyer. And waiting and waiting. We're doing small talk. And finally, I'm about to say, I think we should reschedule this. It's been like 20 minutes. And he came flying in the room. Shorter than me, little guy. Looks like he slept in his suit. I didn't want to touch his hair. It looked like it was slicked back with something that was pretty gross. And he started yelling at me. I've never met the man before. Not only yelling, but using foul language and all the things that I had been abusive to the nurses on, and making up stories. And the foul language was the distractor. I mean, he was using words that none of us would ever say in any conversation. And I think it only went on for about 4 minutes. It felt like it was 20 because it was just awful. And everybody was uncomfortable, including his team. And I stood up and I said, it is very clear to me that we're not going to have a professional conversation. So I'm going to go to my office. I'm going to give everybody time to think about what they want to do. And when you're ready to be respectful, I'll be happy to come back and have that conversation. And I walked out. And the lawyer our lawyer is running at me. You can't do that. I said, it's too late. I'm not in there. I'm not going back in. And so you've got to come with me. So we went to my office, and an hour and a half later, I'm saying, well, maybe I did make the wrong decision. I've never done this negotiating thing. And we just stood our ground, and 2 hours later, 2 of the leaders, not the lawyer, 2 of the leaders of the union came in and said, here's the deal. We do all the negotiating with no lawyers. We bring them in at the end for writing the contract. Can you live with that? I said, I can live with that. It was still a hard negotiation, but we were very respectful on the issues. We were sharing ideas. We didn't always come together on what the answer should be, but we had dialogue, and it was very respectful. So to me, that was, and I wasn't sure it was the right, I just knew at the moment we were not going to get anywhere, and I didn't feel right about letting this conversation go. And I think indirectly, this is the beginning of understanding leadership. I didn't know it at the time, but now that I look back, because it's not only what you do that people look at as you cast your leadership shadow, it's what you permit. If you permit it, it's acceptable. That means that you're the kind of leader who's okay with that behavior. And I certainly wasn't. I was very uncomfortable with it, walked out, and that was a big learning for me in that decade, to stand up for what you believe. And for me, that's integrity of who you are and what the values are that you live. Was I nervous about it? I was a wreck. I mean, my knees were shaking. I wasn't sure this was going to work out right. Maybe they'll fire me because I don't know how to do a negotiation. Everything went through my mind. And needless to say, we ended up with a reasonable contract. So that was one of my standing up for beliefs. So I have that contracting experience in DC, and now I go to Colorado. So Colorado, as I said, we contract with everybody. So, and I had people who did contracting. So I was involved only in the critical hospital, the CEO relationships and those negotiations. And somebody else was doing this medical group that we had an exclusive contract with, very large physician group. We'd had a contract with since the day this group had started. And they weren't getting anywhere. I mean, these negotiations were going on, and it's clearly uncomfortable. So they asked me to come in and take over the negotiations. I was getting nowhere. I mean, the physicians weren't showing up when they were supposed to. They weren't engaging in dialogue. They were just telling us what they wanted, which was not reasonable, and they wouldn't give me any answers about why they wanted more of this or more money or not this in the contract. We were literally getting nowhere. And I went to the CEO of the larger corporation that I worked for and said, who happened to be a physician, and I said, I think I might need your help on this one. I need you to come in. And he just looked me straight in the eye and said, the good guys always win. You're the good guy. Go figure it out. It's on a Friday. I'm thinking, oh, yeah, you're a real mentor to me right now. I need a little idea here, or some support, or maybe if you come in, you can change the tone. So I went home, needless to say, not very happy. And so it's Friday, and my next meeting is Monday night. So I'm like racking my brain to come up with something to do with these guys. And it was all men, physicians and administrators. And I was just not coming up with anything. So I did my little Saturday morning routine, get in my car, go get it washed, fill it up with gas, go to the farmer's market, pick up what I want for the weekend or the week, and head home. But I'm at the farmer's market, and I had this flash. This is kind of keeping your mind open and modify your environment. I said, I'm not getting anywhere doing what I'm doing. So what can I do differently? And here's this nice, like a bushel barrel of tomatoes, really good-looking tomatoes. So that's what caught my eye first, just to buy them. And then I had this flash. I buy the whole thing. So they said, you want the whole thing? I said, yep, the whole thing. I go home, and I call my assistant, and I said, your husband's, he was at Fort Carson, has a flak jacket, doesn't he? And she said, yes. And I said, can I borrow it from Monday? I'll give it back to you Tuesday. Okay. She didn't ask any questions. She was a little nervous, like, all right. So she brought it in. I go to our meeting is at 7 o'clock. I was there always 10, 15 minutes early. I was 20 minutes late, just as they all were all the time. So I got there 20 minutes late. Now they're worried because I'm not there. So that was a change, one. So I flipped it. And I walk in, and they're there. It's kind of in a horseshoe arrangement, tables. And I pull a little table to the front in the middle of them. Whoops, I'm out of range here, sorry. In the middle, put the tomatoes down, put the flak jacket on, and said, I don't know what's bothering you, but get it out of your system. Throw those things at me, and maybe we can move on. Honest to God, you could hear a pin drop in the room. And I'm sure the psychiatrist who's in the back of the room was thinking, oh my God, she's lost her mind. What do I have to do now? But they all just stared at me, truly, like, what? Where is this person coming from? We don't know who she is. And then they started laughing because it was pretty ridiculous. I mean, it was extreme. And they started laughing, and we had probably the best discussion, open dialogue that we had had in years about what they wanted and why they wanted it. And some of it was valid, some of it we could work around and do different things. And then we continued and got to the end of a contract. But at the end of that meeting, they said, well, can we still have the tomatoes? I said, yes, you can have the tomatoes. Yeah. So it's again, just learning and trying new things. And honest to God, that CEO mentored me without my knowing it because he forced me to go back and think about what I had to do. And if he had just told me, I wouldn't have learned from the experience. I would have done what he said or brought him in, and he would have taken over. And what he said was, the good guys always win, go do it. You'll figure it out. And he forced me to really step out of where I was to think. So that was a huge learning for me at that time. Still building on my clinical skills, because that was really important. They liked working with me because I had been in their environments. They built trust much faster than they would have with anybody else that would have been in that organization, and that CEO knew that. So when he put me there, there was a reason, and it worked, and it helped me grow pretty significantly. Here is where I like to use the analogy. A nurse is like a tea bag. You never know how strong she or he is until you put them in hot water. So I love that analogy because that's what I felt like I was doing in that decade. So that's my 30s. Let's go to my 40s. 88 to 98. Animation for the Simpsons cartoon was outsourced to Korea because it was cheaper. Peapod was the first home delivery of fresh food with internet ordering. Wi-Fi was invented. Video conferencing started in that decade. First, text messaging. My granddaughter thinks she invented it. A group of Indian American physicians to outsource to India for medical transcription. eBay was formed. Dolly the sheep was cloned in England. Palm Pilot came out, big, bulky, just like the first cell phone. Desert Storm, Waco. We had a baby boomer president. Diana's death, marriage earlier, death now. Monica Lewinsky, and the beginning of all the Y2K fears that we're going to lose data, the world's going to collapse, something awful is going to happen, and every company and business and hospital was worried about what they had to do for their systems. So what did I do in my 40s? Well, I started mentoring. I was starting giving back. I'd had enough experience. I felt comfortable helping people. Worked for 3 companies, lots of themes here, 3, 4 companies, 3, 4 roles, this time 5 roles. I got on boards. They were industry boards, but I started my how to be a board member. Met my husband here in Minnesota, so that was one of my moves. For a long time, he never knew I was using the pictures, so. So I finally told him because I figured somebody I knew that had been in the audience would say, oh, I saw the picture in the presentation. So he said, really? Which picture? And he had 2 daughters and 1 grandchild, so started an instant family. We built a new home, 2 physical moves of houses, and still 2 cats. He had 2, I had 2. We had a blended family for a while, then we got down to 2 again. So what did I learn in that decade? And a lot of learnings. So let me start with the F's, and then I'll share my others. So I kept family, faith, and friends, but now I'm in a very different environment. I'm learning through multiple moves. So I went from Colorado, this is from Minnesota, so I went from Colorado, where I ran the health plan, and then actually 2 health plans, for about a little over 4 years. And then the company was bought out, actually, after 2 years, 50% by UnitedHealth at the time, and 50% by another company. So that was okay, because they were busy dealing with their 50%, but then the other company bought us outright. And for all the good work we had done on the clinical work and how we were using data to make decisions, they took it all down and started going backwards to a very old traditional fee-for-service insurance model, and I didn't think that was where I wanted to be. So I got recruited to Boston to run the Prudential Northeast region for all of their health products, life, dental, health, medical, et cetera, vision. So did that for a year. And reason, that's my probably shortest 1-year stint. Reason for that was, and I said right up front to the person recruiting me, I don't know if this is the right job for me, and I don't know if you're going to want me in this job. So let's commit to a year and see how it goes. And the reason I was hesitant was I didn't think Prudential knew if they wanted to stay in this business, but just through the interview. So again, those instincts. And I stayed a year to the day, and they didn't want to really be in the business. They weren't supporting it properly. They weren't recognizing what changes, they didn't accept that changes had to be made to grow this business. And in reality, 2 years after I left, they sold the whole United States health business. So they indeed weren't investing in it. So I'm glad I made the decision, but I got recruited to come here to UnitedHealth. I thought, okay, I have one more move in me. So I hope this is going to be the right one. And obviously it was. And what I found when I got here was a very fast-moving organization. So when I came to United, we had $600 million of revenue. To give you a sense of the change from 1990 to now, $600 million, and we're going to close the year with over $121 billion. So that's a big change. We started with about 1,200, when I started, we had about 1,200 employees. And today, depending on who's counting, we have about 133,000. So needless to say, it's been a fast-moving, growing organization. But what I found was when I was recruiting people, because we didn't have culture then, we were just a small, kind of growing fast company, but I needed to describe what we were. And how I described us was fact-based, and that meant administrative decisions and clinical decisions. Now we call it evidence-based medicine, but at the time we didn't. But needing facts to make decisions on what we were going to be doing. Focused. We had lots of opportunity to do acquisitions or to start up companies, but we kept evaluating them within the framework of where we had capacity and knowledge and skill sets. Flexible, regulatory changes. Medicare was making lots of changes in that decade, so you had to be flexible and adaptable. But you had to also get people engaged, because if you're making change, people need to understand it, because it's always what's in it for me, I'm protecting my space. So if we need to do things differently to that adaptability and flexibility, You need to give feedback to people, you need to coach them, you need to transition them into other roles, you need to train them sometimes, and from what they know in a commercial market to a Medicare market, whatever it might be. A lot of what we do is telephonic, and so you need to be friendly, because if you're not in a good mood and you pick up that phone and you talk to a patient, they know it, because it comes across in your voice. As a matter of fact, one year when we were having a lot of stress, I got mirrors for everybody and had them put them near their phone so they could see their face before they picked up that phone. And actually that worked. Many of them still have the mirrors. But being friendly to each other and then being friendly to the people we serve, and we all work too hard. You've got to have fun built into the environment. So those are my F's. And I use those today when I talk to people about our company, because it's really important to keep it in mind. And there will be change, because if we don't change, somebody around us will be changing and will be better than us, and we're going to be catching up all the time. So if you're going to be a leader, personally and with your business, you need to be changing and looking at how we get ahead of the curve. So back to my learnings. I learned that the sharing experiences through mentoring is really useful. I learned from that, therefore I should give back. So I started mentoring with a company in the Twin Cities called Mentium, which was at that time for women. Actually, I think it still is. But I mentor on a national basis for them, now still, 20 years later, and mentored in the company, formally and informally. And I do that as well. On an average, on a given year today, I have 3 full-time mentees on average, sometimes 4, and usually some informal ones as well. Worked for 3 companies, the Colorado, the Boston to here, 5 different roles, 2 boards as I mentioned. So I'm sharing the experience because now I'm learning. And I'm learning by looking at those roles and companies and those boards that there's a big difference between confidence and arrogance. And I'm starting to recognize, I like confidence a lot, but that arrogance stuff gets in the way. And I worked with some people, or sat on the opposite side of the table, and I didn't realize that before. I was just mature enough that I started to notice the difference. So I learned what not to do and how to start building a different presence for myself. That goes back to how do you build your presence. Keep learning and focus on what you like. I was getting opportunity. I came into the organization in an operational role. Corporate, I'd never done corporate before, corporate and operations. Got into the minutia of claims, billing, enrollment, sales, underwriting, actuarial services. Not to say I'm expert in any of those, but I got to learn what we needed to do, how we needed to do it, how did we get input from our customers, et cetera. But I also learned this is not where it's the best use of my skill set. And our CEO started to realize that very quickly. I was getting kind of inundated with all this minutia that was frustrating for me, and I was missing the exchange with the outside world. And what he started doing is giving me small businesses to manage. So some of you may know Evercare from this market, nurse practitioners, geriatric care. So I took Evercare for a period of time. I took our Optum Triage, which is a 24/7 nurse triage unit at that time. So I had Medicare. We had a small Medicare business. It didn't fit anywhere. I took Medicare. So I took the little parts of the businesses while I was doing this operational role. And I was very involved in mergers and acquisitions. So I'm learning, but I'm starting to focus on where can I add the most value? How do I take all this learning that I have and really make a difference? I'm also learning you got to balance your career, your family, your friends, and your community. Now think of all my moves. I've got friends all over the country now. Now which ones are truly the friends that I don't ever want to lose? So that's my tier 1. And then which are the friends that are important to me either as subject matter experts to help me in certain parts of my career or life, and maybe a once-a-year contact is fine for them and for me. And then I call the rest acquaintances. They're nice people. I'll socialize with them sometime, but I don't have a need to actually keep them on the I have to make sure I connect with them list. So I started mentally tiering them that way, and I started spending more time in the community. I'm also taking on broader responsibilities, so everybody wanted to give me everything. But your to-do list gets this big, and not all of it is as important. It's not equal. So I started learning how to prioritize and saying, okay, these 3 things or 4 things are have-tos, and how do I set goals around those? And then the others are nice too, and if we get to them, fine. But these 3 are going to give me 80% of the impact that we're going to have in this, whatever part of the company I was working in, versus the rest of them. So if I can't identify the impact and prioritize, then shame on me personally. Most people don't change, but you can. I didn't go into my second marriage thinking I was changing my husband. I may have thought that in my first, which is why it didn't work. But if you change your behavior, or you smile when somebody's not in a good mood, funny how they smile back and they change their mood. And if you open the dialogue instead of starting with the critical, you can actually change it to a more open dialogue. And I do a lot of culture facilitation now, and I used to do this as well, is when you give appreciation for what somebody's done, and then talk about how can we make it better, you can actually get people to think about the behavior by how you approach them. So this is one of my learnings in my 40s, and it got honed in my 50s and 60s. The other very important thing for me, and if you need me to stop anytime, you give me the hook, but I have 2 decades left, take care of yourself. Nobody's going to do it for you. I was really busy. I was on the road all the time. I was running around. I was never ordering because somebody was ordering the food for me, and I was gaining weight. I call myself the 30-pounder. 30 pounds up, 30 pounds down, 30 pounds up, 30 pounds down. And I had been doing that for 15, 20 years, but now it was more up because of the stress of the job, and I wasn't paying attention. Well, my mother was gaining a lot of weight as well. She had type 2 diabetes, and then she had a stroke. Very predictably, had a stroke. And I remember that day saying, I love my mother. I'm glad I have a lot of her personality, but I'm not going to be her physically. And the only way I can do that is if I take care of myself. Nobody's going to do it for me. And now I'm a 5-pound swinger, not a 30-pound swinger. I still go on vacation, and those 5 pounds go up, but they come off. And so I call myself a 5-pound swinger. My mother actually had 2 strokes, and went down. They were living in Florida full-time at that time, and I said, Mom, you don't have to be this way. Lots of medications for everything you can imagine. The blood pressure and the cholesterol and the diabetes. And I said, you're going back on Weight Watchers, that's it. And I had friends who were neighbors who started doing the cooking. And stroke, gait belt, walker, we had to do exercises in bed, we had to do laps in the house, she had to walk outside. Florida, most of the time she could. She had to do squats at the sink. And God bless her, she did it. We had her lose over 100 pounds in a year, over 100 pounds. So when people say to me they can't do it, it is doable. It's changing a mindset. And that was another big learning for me that that's the changing the behavior. My mother changed. Once she realized this was her health, we got her off almost all of her medications. She had the healthiest 8 to 9 years of her life at the end of her life, which is the opposite of what you'd expect, than she'd had for probably 15, 20 years before. And so just saying, okay, we can do this, here's why we're going to do it, and here's how we're going to do it, made such a big difference for both of us. Change is constant, as I mentioned, and then taking personal responsibility. That's part of it, was taking care of myself and helping my mother take care of herself. I had to stop my father. He was the one who was feeding her pie and ice cream, so he was my biggest challenge. So I had to have little side conversations with him. But all of that was in my 40s. Let's see, did I miss anything? Oh, the thing I really learned here in my 40s is that leadership is behavior, it's not a title. I had a lot of jobs where I didn't have responsibility for everybody, but I had influence opportunity on them. And I was seen as a leader, but I didn't manage them. And so I had to figure out how to do that and how to work with them. You guys can come in and have a seat. There's lots of good seats here. And so that was a big learning for me in that decade. The other thing that I learned in this decade, aside from the F's, is that I think is really important in leadership, is having energy. If you have low energy, people have low energy with you. But if you have high energy, and Kim said that to me today, what did you call me, the Energizer Bunny? I have high energy. Susan knows me too, so you know that I generally have high energy. I'm enthusiastic. And I generally try to think about, there are options. We may have a challenge in front of us, but what are the options? There's more in the glass than we see, so let's figure it out and we can do it better together. And then have empathy, because people do have bad days or have issues to deal with personally and professionally. And just be there to listen so that you can move them along. I learned a lot of that in my 40s just because of the experiences that I had. I also learned, and we use this quote actually from Darwin to talk about our organization. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is the most adaptable to change. But that needs to be balanced with the art of progress is to preserve order amid change and to preserve change amid order. Changing for the sake of change is not necessarily useful, and it's really hard to explain because you don't get the best output. So identifying what should be changed, keeping what needs to be stable while you're going through that change is an art because there are a lot of people who say we need to make a massive change, and then you undermine the things that are supporting where you want to go. And so being thoughtful about how you change is really important, and how you communicate change, because people misinterpret. I could tell one story in this room, and I probably have at least 10 or 15 views, because you're hearing it through your own filters about where you're at in the moment. So how we communicate and how we support communication is really important, and I think that's another leadership learning. So my 50s, what was going on in the world? You can look at the picture while I'm telling you. So this is an easy one. This is 98 to 2007. So think about this. Google, BlackBerry, Wikipedia, iTunes, iPhone, iPods. I could do a lot of more I's. So technology, that was a big expansion of technology and beginning of social media. 9/11 occurred in that decade. Security checkpoints at airports, the Iraq War, the shoe bomber, the Mars rover. So lots of things in that decade, not that far back. I'm continuing to mentor one company. My father was so proud of me. One company for 10 years. He couldn't believe that I wasn't moving. But I had 6+ roles. Now I'm on 9 boards in that decade. So I've decided that I'm still on some industry boards. I'm on some community boards. And I'm just picking and choosing which ones I want to learn from and give back to. Family grew. We have 4 more grandchildren, so we have 5 now. The current ages are 23 down to 9, soon to be 10, she reminds me. Ongoing house construction, we have 6.5 acres. My husband, who's fabulous, was actually a project manager, high-end project manager at IBM for many years, and then did his own consulting for many years, is really a frustrated architect builder. And so I never know when we're going to have a hole in the ground or an addition on the house or a room looks different, but it's all good. It's all good. I just want to get rid of the dust and the workers. That's my challenge. Dealing with aging parents now, both sets of parents. We've been blessed to have them for many, many years, but both sets of parents were having health issues, so taking care of them, and one in Florida and one in Southwest Minnesota. So either one, it was a 3.5-hour plane ride or drive to get to. And several relatives who were not well, and we're all nurses, and who gets the call when somebody's not doing well in the family. So lots of conversations, long distance, about family relatives. As Dan said, I was nominated for 3 years in a row for the Fortune 50 Most Powerful Women, and lots of other recognition. The reason I put that there was it was very interesting. It was the first year that Fortune decided to highlight women in business, and I didn't even know about it. They sent me a one-pager to respond to, and that wasn't my priority. I was running UnitedHealth at the time. I was pretty busy, and filling something out for a magazine was not high on my list. It was like way down in the bottom. And what I didn't know was for this purpose. And so finally, one of our communications people came in, sat with me while I filled it out. So I just need to send this in. Just fill it out for me. And it was really demographics, kind of where do you live, what's your career like, what are your degrees in, are you married or not, how many kids do you have, what's the revenue that you manage now, what do you do in the community, kind of the board stuff. And the last question is, and do you play golf? And I thought, really? Do you play golf? Who cares? You know, and the answer was no. And what I didn't know, 3 months later, they interviewed our board. They interviewed businesses that were customers. They interviewed some of the boards that I was on for the community. They looked at all the company's financials. And so I was one of the women named, and one of the few in healthcare, I might add. And so that's fabulous. But what I learned in my 50s is I did not win that award. think about all of the, if we didn't have a company that had revenue of a certain level, I wouldn't have even been eligible. That revenue is not because I created the business. I had 15,000 employees at the time, maybe 18,000. That group are the people who needed to be recognized. I happened to be the person to get the award and the name in the magazine. And I called my senior leadership team, and we talked about how do you use this, both internally and externally. Internally, to recognize all the employees who made this happen, because they are part of it, which was very true. And secondly, how do you use this with all these people we work with and employer groups to leverage the fact that we were recognized because we're such a good company? And a lot of the decision makers in healthcare are women. So highlight the fact that a woman is running this business. And so we actually got incredible benefit from that particular award. And again, it was 3 years in a row because it was UnitedHealthcare. My husband, God bless him, pulled off a surprise 50th birthday party in the middle of all this chaos. And he did it 3 weeks in advance of my birthday, which really helped because I wasn't even thinking about it. And again, the 2 cats. So what did I learn? Be flexible. So I became, in 98, we restructured to UnitedHealth Group. So I had been in this operational role, lots of different responsibilities, to 6 business units, and one of them kept the name UnitedHealthcare. I became the first of the CEOs to be named, and I became CEO of UnitedHealthcare, so that's the largest business, and still is today, and which is why Fortune picked it up, because of the changes going on. I did that for about 3.5 years, and then was asked to be the CEO of Ingenix, which is our data analytics, data warehousing, data tools, decision support tools, pharmaceutical services, clinical research services, epidemiology, et cetera. So I did that for 3 years. It's now called Optum Insight. And then I was moving into a corporate role, and in my corporate role, I was asked, I was just about to start it, we were going to frame it up, and I was asked to go back and put a couple of our businesses together and create a new business, which was within Optum. So we took that 24/7 business I mentioned, and our care coordination, which was disease management, discharge planning, home planning, et cetera, home care, and put those together to create a more robust Optum Health. So I did that for 2 years. And then I did move into my current role, which has expanded pretty much. I'm a person of one, mostly because of my experience at United, and I have the fabulous, I say the best job there, which is the one I have now, which is focusing on strategic relationships with customers, with partnerships externally, so as an executive-to-executive relationship, not the day-to-day. I'd be dangerous. I've been away from day-to-day too long. I represent us on boards locally and nationally. One of the local boards is Dean Delaney's School of Nursing Board of Visitors. So I do that here, and 2 other academic boards in Boston, and then both not-for-profit and business boards. I oversee our social responsibility agenda for that large organization, UnitedHealth Group, our philanthropy as well as our volunteering and our foundations. I created and support now a Center for Nursing Advancement, which I'm very proud of. We started that in 2008 for the purpose of recruiting, retaining, and developing nurses. And Susan Jessica is one of our team members now, and we're very, very pleased to have her, and doing some wonderful things there. And that could be another hour someday. Get Dawn to come and do that one. Dawn Bazarko got her doctorate here and is leading that for us, doctorate in nursing. And I'm an ambassador for our culture initiatives, and I'm involved in culture facilitation in the organization. And I mentor, as I mentioned, and I do special assignments. When they don't have a home in any one of our businesses, frequently I'll evaluate it or get it started, and then once it's got some money or it's got direction, it moves into a business. So it's a fabulous way to use all my background and my skills, so that's what I'm doing now. But I started it in that decade. Didn't know where it was going to lead, by the way, but it evolved. This was one of my busiest decades because when I became CEO of UnitedHealthcare, and I mentioned these other things, everything happened at once. Within literally a 3-week period, maybe 4, I was asked to take the CEO role. which we thought the person who was going to take it was going to be there till the end of the year. And he decided, why do that? Let's just give somebody the runway. And so, like, overnight, they asked me to take this role. And I remember saying, well, I need at least 24 hours. I talked to my husband, and I said, you know, if I take this job, I'm gone, because I've got to retool. I'm the first person to become a business. We're taking all these people who have been in a corporate role, and we're now assigning them to businesses. I've got to sort out, who do we get? Where do we put them? Where do we have duplication? Where do we have gaps? I've got to talk to all of our customers, because we're going to go through some change. They need to understand that. I've got to talk to all the brokers, the consultants we work with. I've got to talk to the hospitals, not all of them, but the key ones, and physician groups. So I'm going to be on the road a lot, sorting this out. And he said, yeah, so you have to do this. This is the right thing to do. You know, kind of like the CEO mentor, you know, go do it. And I said, but that means we're not going to have a lot of family time. Now, you saw that nice picture with the kids and the grandkids. So in 3 weeks, our older daughter gets married. She had had one child previous to this marriage. She gets married literally the weekend before I'm kicking off as the CEO. She doesn't know. We didn't tell her. So I'm getting we're doing the wedding and everything. And she leaves on her honeymoon, and I start the next day. So that's one. I had to define a new executive team immediately and a vision statement for this business, because I was meeting with my new senior leadership team that week, which had already been arranged. And I lost my cell phone in the middle of this, because I was using it all the time, talking to people in between. You know, we're getting the manicures before the wedding. I'm in the back room recruiting people on the phone on the weekend to start the following week. And one of them, who I knew really well, lived in Ohio and was running a region for us. I said, Bob, this is going to be great for you. He said, my wife's never been to Minnesota. I'll send her flowers. Don't worry, she'll love Minnesota. I did. I sent her like a huge bouquet. And he took the job. He came up and helped me and did a phenomenal job. But it was people that I knew and trusted for certain key positions, and that's what you do when you get to this point. So I did that. I got the new team going, and then my husband did the 50th birthday party. And he had arranged with everybody that it was weekend party. People had to have known me for 25 years or more. He's the only one who was invited that wasn't in that category. And it was a Friday night to Sunday. I walk in the door, and I know we're going to have dinner with two people, because they're early for my birthday, because they were moving to New Mexico, and they were retiring. If they didn't, they went to New Mexico and took different jobs. She went and taught in the School of Nursing, and he went and worked for the newspaper. So they were just needing to be where they were going to retire. But long story short, I'm thinking they're the ones we're having dinner with. So my husband picks me up at work, we get home, and then we were going to go out to dinner, and I walked. There was a tree down. We had had a storm, so he said, well, let's go in the front door. Lucky for him, because caterer's in the back. I didn't know that. And so we walk in the front door, and she is there with a glass of champagne. And I'm like thinking, oh, that's kind of neat. We're celebrating my birthday, and I'm going to have a glass of champagne. And then these people come around the corner. They're people I haven't seen in 10 years. And I'm looking, and two, and then two more, and then another person. And I'm like starting to get a little curious, like, where are they all sleeping? That's my first thought. They're all from out of town. Where are they all sleeping? And she's little. She's about this big. She literally pulls me down, and she said, bedrooms are clean, sheets are clean, flowers in every bedroom, clean towels, don't worry, drink and eat. That's all you're required to do. And then she said, and drink this now, the champagne. And it was a total surprise. So it was a wonderful weekend. I was forced to let work go, but he had arranged it with all my work colleagues. They knew, and so they knew I was out of commission until Sunday night. And so it was a wonderful, and actually it was nice to break up. I'd have been on the road for 3 weeks. But the other thing that I learned here was that balance. So be flexible, schedule what's important, that balance. So when I thought about it and thought I'm not going to see the family very much, because I was working weekends as well, and to do this right, it was a 24/7 for a while. So I got 3 calendars, got the daughters in, said, okay, here's the deal. Pick a weekend a month. It can't start before 7 on Friday, and it's got to end by 5 on Sunday, either the whole weekend or part of the weekend, once a month, and I will commit to that weekend. If there's something really important that for children or activities or something that you want me to be part of, you tell me, and I'll see what I can do about that. But I will commit to a weekend a month. And you fill out the calendars, you negotiate among each other, and then you give me my calendar. And they did it, and I was able to hit all but one Saturday where our board executive committee, this is when Medicare was changing, the Balanced Budget Act, and everything was changing, and it was hitting us hard. I had to come in and review our action plan with them on a Saturday. So it killed my day. But we found another Saturday to make it up. And so it was good. So fast forward to Ingenix. I become CEO of Ingenix. And not a big deal, I'm going to travel, but we had a routine down for all of this now. But it was fascinating because they hear I'm in a new CEO role, they show up with calendars, we're ready. And so they took charge of, let's manage this now. And I laughed because we didn't really need it quite as much, but it was really helpful. And they felt like they were in control, and they felt that they were going to get quality time. They didn't care about the quantity because they were worried that I'd be with them and checking the phone or checking emails or writing a report or reading while they're talking to me, and that they realized that that quality time was much more beneficial for them and their children than the quantity. So it was quality over quantity. And that was a big aha. It worked really well. I highly recommend you schedule what's important in your life. I schedule my exercise. I schedule when I want to see family. It's on the calendar. It's on my work calendar, because when it's blocked, it doesn't get booked. But if it doesn't get scheduled, it may not happen. Giving back became important. I got much more active in the community, church and community. Recognizing others. That Fortune magazine article was a good leap of how do you recognize other people? And make sure you do it publicly. Do it one-on-one, but do it publicly as well. Teach values by actions. That's what you permit, you promote, and the leadership shadow. Network. I had to be selective, just like friends, about which networks. I mean, I could be on a gazillion networks. Everybody wanted, well, in those days they didn't have it, but they wanted to befriend me. And I just couldn't do all of that. So I had to select the networks, that whether it was through boards or industry activities that I wanted to stay involved with. And then I had to remember which networks were important for my continued development. Be patient and thoughtful. Lots of people were throwing, make this decision. You're the CEO. We need this decision now. Well, 90% of the time it was their decision, and it could wait a week, and we could get better data. But when they first started throwing things at me, I was trying to make decisions. And I thought, this isn't the right way to do it. It doesn't feel right. So let's go back to those instincts and figure out a better way to do it. Learn to be much more patient and thoughtful, and people get used to that routine. Know yourself and know your skills, and surround yourself with people who are not like you. So you get better ideas and better results. It's a lot of that in my 50s. QBQ, I use with all of my teams. For those of you who are not familiar with it, is The Question Behind the Question by John Miller, J-O-N, Miller. And it's an easy read. And it's about personal accountability. So the question behind the question is, what can I do? I, not we, they, and do, which is action-oriented. So what can I do to be more accountable? What can I do in this situation? And we had a lot of change in the organization, and people were distracted by that. So by using this as a tool to ground people, there's always something you can do in an environment, no matter how disruptive it may be. And that was extremely valuable for us. So I'm going to use a Dan Escher quote that I got last week from your folder, because I think this is what's happening with us now. The power and force of nursing is achieved as each nurse acknowledges his or her needs, strengths, and talents, and uses them to master the complex leadership skill set that is required to create a 21st century healthcare system. I think it's a great quote. That's what I was going through, thinking about how do I take all of the talents, the history that I have, and how do I start doing something meaningful to still impact? Our mission at United is to help people live healthier lives. How do I take what I'm doing and make sure that we're hitting that target? And how do we measure the impact of that? And how do we adapt to it? And that's clearly your quote, and I think it's terrific. And when we think about the 21st century healthcare system and what's ahead of us, we are the leaders who are going to help make that happen. We're going to deliver the care. We're going to help people deliver the care. We're going to make sure we don't lose the nursing values that we bring to the table. We need to expand the visibility on scope of practice nationally. And there's huge opportunity for nurses if we think about ourselves as leading in this next decade of what we can do to impact the healthcare system. And that's a lot of what I was focused on in my 50s. So now let's go to my 60s. So that means we're at the end. So my 60s. Well, 60s is pretty much social media and healthcare reform. So that's really what was going on. And more technology, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, et cetera, and then health reform. That's the two big things that I saw from that decade, and I'm only halfway through it. So people call me now, I have an EVP title, but the UHG ambassador. I'm kind of a culture ambassador, a nursing ambassador, a this ambassador. So I've kind of got a lot of people introduce me frequently as the ambassador. I'm on 12 boards, 3 academic, 2 community, 3 business boards, 2 philanthropy boards, and 2 industry boards. We created in 2005, but we created it, but we didn't do anything until a little bit later for Family Foundation. My husband and I came from very humble beginnings. We are very blessed with the careers that we've had and the opportunity that we can to give back. So we created that foundation, and a few years ago also pulled in. So he and I did it first so we could figure out what we were doing. It's a whole new learning experience when you do that. And our 2 daughters are board members with us. So we're teaching giving back through the family as well. And we're bringing children into some of the decisions and the experiences. And we're doing volunteering as family. So we're doing lots of good things with the family. And 4 years ago, 4.5, almost 5 years ago, same time, my husband was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and which he had seed implants. He's doing absolutely fine. But a daughter at the age of 41 diagnosed by mammography with stage 3 breast cancer with lymph node involvement, no family history, no symptoms. So I'm a big mammography supporter since that event. She underwent chemo, 2 different rounds, bilateral mastectomy, radiation, reconstructive surgery, and then ovary removal because of biopsies. She's doing fine. She will, in February, hit her 5-year mark. So we're very happy. It took her about 3 years to get all of her blood levels back to normal. But she's doing fine. And so if anybody asked me what my priority was, at least for that year, no doubt they knew. And getting them to doctors, procedures, hospitals, being there for surgeries. I was there for all but one of her chemos, and I'm glad I was. She had an allergic reaction at one of them. And this is a funny experience. It's local, I won't tell you where. But I'm listening to her, and she's coughing. She was sleeping, coughing. And then she starts wheezing. And then she is wheezing to the point that this breathing is not good. So I get up, stop the chemo, turn it off, go out, tell the nurse to get the doctor in immediately. And she said, well, no, I have to go stop the chemo. I said, no, I already did that. You get the doctor. And the first look were daggers. I mean, literally, like, you can't do that. And then she took a deep breath, and she said, I'll get the doctor. And came back in. And she said to me, I'm really sorry about that. But you're not supposed to do that. And I said, it's okay. It's been a long time, but I am a nurse, and I knew how to do that. And she said, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't have done that. And I said, you know what? I wasn't taking a chance because I didn't know where this was going. It was progressing so fast. And the doctor came in, and he said, oh, I'm glad you did that. He's a really great oncologist. But yeah, that was so I knew that it was meant to be that I was there for those visits. And the last one, a friend of hers wanted to take her, and it was her last chemo. And she did fine. And her attitude was positive through every second of it. She said, I have 3 kids. I don't know why this is a distraction to me, but we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to take care of it. And she has done very well. So lots of learnings and lots of bonding through that experience. As Dan said, a privilege and an honor last fall to be inducted as a fellow into the American Academy. And we had to put 1 cat down for uncontrolled diabetes. So after a year and a half of insulin shots and not getting him regulated, kidney failure, we said we're taking him out of his misery. So his sister is still with us. She's 17, a little over 17, so we'll see. She seems healthy. We'll see. Updated picture of, at the top, my husband and our grandchildren from a year and a half ago, and then our daughters. So what are my learnings? Life is what you make it. You know, you can take the bad and grumble and whine, or you can say, what can I do with this, and turn it around. We have options. We control it. I continue to tell everybody, take care of yourself, because nobody can do that as good as you can for yourself, and you can't take care of anybody else if you're not taking care of yourself. It's I first, then we, they. Stay involved. There's an opportunity for me to say, okay, I'm overwhelmed, I'm doing too much. I'm busier now than I've ever been, even though I'm not running a business. I'm running parts of businesses. I am adding more fun travel versus just business travel, and that's been really nice. Keep sharing and learning. When I turned 60, our CEO, one of our regular meetings, and they had cake was for everybody because of my birthday, so he knew I was 60. So no eye contact, but well, you just had a birthday. Are you thinking of retiring? And I said, I wasn't expecting that question. And there are two options here. One is you need a new team, and I'm kind of this one-off, and I get that, and you want to do, he was making some changes. If you want to have a conversation about that, then I'll be happy to do that. But if you're asking me if I'm thinking of retiring, the answer is as long as I'm healthy and my family's healthy, and I'm still learning and contributing, why would I leave? I'm going to go do it somewhere else. And I know this environment, and if I can be useful, I'll be here. He said, okay, meeting's over. That was it. He's never asked me since. So that was really good. That's the sharing and learning. Recognize what and who is important in your life, both professionally and personally. Have fun, and then continue your echo. And as I describe it now that I do this culture facilitation, we talk a lot about kind of gravity issues, things you can't control. And there are things that you can't control. But instead of trying to work on those, or I couldn't control the traffic this morning, I wasn't happy with it. It took me a lot longer to get here, but I couldn't control it. So if I whined about it half the morning, I'd lose all that energy to something negative. So I describe a lot of what I do now as getting rid of those gravity issues and just focusing on the things that I can have both influence and pleasure from. So I describe it as be the kind of woman, and sorry for the men in the room, that when your feet hit the ground in the morning and you know it's gravity and you can't do anything about it, but it's good, the devil says, oh crap, she's up. And, and you just go for it and live your life the way you'd like to live it. I'm going to end with a story and 2 more slides, and then we'll go to our next step of questioning. So creating your life's echo, that's what I'm doing now, casting my shadow, creating my echo. And you're doing that every day, whether you realize it or not, with family, with peers, with people you work with. This is an example of a boy and his father who were walking in the mountains, and suddenly the boy falls, hurts himself, and screams. And much to his surprise, he hears this scream repeating somewhere in the mountain. Curious, he yells, "Who are you?" Well, he receives the answer, "Who are you?" Confused by this, he screams, "Coward." He hears the repeat of "coward," and he looks at his father and said, "Okay, what's that?" The father smiles and says, "Pay attention, just listen." And he says, "I admire you." The voice answers, "I admire you." The next thing he says is, "You are a champion." Well, what he hears back is, "You are a champion." So the boy's still a little confused because it still sounds the same to him. It's being repeated. Then the father says, "People call this an echo, but it's life. It gives back everything you say or do. It's a reflection of our actions and our words. If you want more love in the world, create more love in your own heart. If you want more competence in yourself or your team, improve your competence. Your team will improve as well." And the relationship applies to everything in all aspects of life. Life will give you back what you give to it. And Catherine Densford once said, "Unfinished work of nursing is our obligation to look for the greater contributions of care." And I think that's part of the echo that we all are here to pass on. So, a couple of quotes, and I love this quote from John Quincy Adams. "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you're a leader. You don't need that title. It's what you do and how you impact people." And then I did my decades. Now, I've been telling this story, and thank you for those of you who've heard it before for being patient with it. 3 years ago, so I've been doing this for about 7 years. 3 years ago, I find that Change Masters actually did a study on this. If I had known this, I would have started with this, but I didn't, so I share it with you. So in your 20s, we emphasize task completion, learning to handle multiple projects, time management, working with others, etc. Emphasis in our 30s is on collaborating with others, increasing perspective on issues and problems, enlisting and working with people better. Emphasis in our 40s is on balancing management and leadership, taking it that next level of supervision up the ladder, management and leadership. And then 50s and 60s, seasoned leadership, actually taking the greater perspective, projecting wisdom to the wisdom dialogue, and personal integrity, and listen, and then help people come to their conclusions about what the next steps are. So I would say this clearly reflects mine. I'm not unique. The unique part is I share my story. A lot of people don't take the time to share their stories. My life is a journey. Sometimes I went up and down a rung or went sideways on a rung. Yours is the same. Share your stories with people. It's impressive how much we've done when you step back and think about it. And then the last slide is doing nothing is the most tiresome job in the world because you can't stop and rest. And so I leave you with that thought and look forward to the questions as you go through your 1, 2, 4, I get. Thank you.